There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They were the plain clothes of a Tuesday night, or the quiet hum of a refrigerator, and you don't recognize them as watershed events until much, much later. They are the doors that swing open on silent, well-oiled hinges, revealing a room you never knew existed within the familiar architecture of your own life. For me, that door was the living room couch, and the moment was the weight of Ben's head in my lap, his breathing as slow, even tied against the shore of my own anxious stillness. It was a moment that felt both impossibly fragile and as solid as bedrock, a contradiction I had been living inside for 67 nights. I had counted them, each one a grain of sand passing through the narrow neck of an hourglass, measuring the slow erosion of the boundary between us, the line I had so carefully drawn, and he so carelessly, so beautifully, kept crossing. He was asleep, or at least performing a convincing facsimile of it. The faint blue light from the muted television cast his features in a soft, sculptural relief. The sharp line of his jaw, a geography I had memorized from a distance, was softened now by the slight slackness of sleep. One of his hands was curled loosely on his own chest, the other lay open on the cushion beside my leg, palm up, a silent, vulnerable offering. I watched the slow rise and fall of his chest, a rhythm that had become as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. In the quiet of our apartment, a space that had once been defined by its separate rooms and designated territories, this shared ritual had created a new center of gravity. Everything orbited this couch, this strange, unspoken intimacy. My world had shrunk to the size of this small, warm space, to the scent of his laundry detergent and the faint, lingering smell of the mint tea he drank before bed. It was a dangerous, intoxicating littleness. I had been in love with him for 4 years. It was a quiet, well-managed affliction, a chronic condition I had learned to live with. It existed in the background of our friendship, a low hum beneath the easy laughter and late-night conversations. It was a secret garden I tended in the most private corners of my mind, a place I never intended to show him. Our friendship was a carefully constructed edifice, strong and reliable, and I would sooner have set fire to my own darkroom than risk its foundations for a feeling he had never shown any sign of reciprocating. So I became an expert in the art of loving from a distance, of appreciating the light without ever trying to touch the flame. I was the quiet observer, the photographer cataloging the beauty of a world I was a part of, yet separate from. And for a long time, that had been enough. It had to be. But then came the shift. Then came the unraveling. And Ben, in his quiet desperation, had walked into my secret garden, not with the intention of trespassing, but simply because he was lost, and it was the only place that felt safe. He didn't know the names of the flowers I grew there. He didn't understand the years of careful cultivation. He just knew the air was breathable and the ground was soft. And I, the foolish gardener, had let him stay. I had let him lie down amongst the carefully tended blossoms of my long-held affection, and I had watched, breathless, as he began to make it his home. This moment, this 67th night with his head in my lap, felt like the culmination of it all. It felt like a question being asked in a language I was only just beginning to understand, a question that hung in the silent, blue-lit air between us, heavy with the weight of everything we weren't saying. The television screensaver began to drift across the screen, a slow, hypnotic dance of abstract shapes, and I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and thrilling, that the ordinary disguise had fallen away. This was not just a Tuesday night. This was a threshold, and I was already halfway across. We met, as so many people do, through the manufactured camaraderie of a team. A recreational soccer league, to be precise, one of those beer league affairs where enthusiasm far outstripped talent. I had joined on a whim, coaxed by a colleague who promised it was more about the post-game pictures than the on-field performance. I was a photographer by trade, a profession built on patience and solitude. Team sports were not my natural habitat. I spent my days in the quiet alchemy of the darkroom, coaxing images from silver and light, or behind a lens, framing the world into manageable rectangles. The chaotic, sprawling energy of a soccer field was an alien landscape. And then there was Ben. He was the opposite of everything I was. He was pure, unadulterated kinetic energy. Where I was still water, he was a roaring current. He played midfield, a constant blur of motion, all sharp angles and explosive speed. He yelled encouragement. He high-fived everyone. He celebrated goals, his or anyone else's, with an infectious, unself-conscious joy. He was, in a word, golden, the kind of person who seemed to generate his own light. Our friendship didn't ignite. It coalesced, slowly, like dew on grass. It started with him offering me a ride home after a game, his car a chaotic symphony of discarded energy drink cans and stray soccer socks. We discovered we lived only a few blocks apart. The rides became a regular thing. We'd talk about the game, about work. His was in software consulting, a world of deadlines and client demands that seemed as foreign to me as my world of f-stops and developing times was to him. About movies, about nothing. His energy, which I had initially found overwhelming from a distance, was different up close. It was warm, inviting. He had a way of listening, a genuine curiosity that made you feel like you were the most interesting person in the world. He'd ask about my photography, not just the polite, "What do you shoot?" but real questions about process and meaning. He made me feel seen, in a way I wasn't used to. I was the one who did the seeing, the observing. It was a novel, and not unpleasant, sensation to have the lens turned back on me. The moment it changed for me, the precise second the foundation of our friendship shifted under my feet, is etched into my memory like a photograph. It was a late autumn afternoon. We were at a park, kicking a ball around, just the two of us. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and decaying leaves. The sun was low in the sky, casting long, dramatic shadows and bathing everything in that syrupy, golden light that photographers live for. Ben had just scored a ridiculous, fluky goal against me, the ball bouncing off a tree root and ricocheting into the makeshift goal we'd marked with our jackets. He threw his head back and laughed. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was a full-bodied, unrestrained explosion of pure joy. The sound of it seemed to echo in the quiet park. And in that moment, with the golden light catching in his hair, his face tilted towards the sky, I felt something shift inside me. It was a tectonic plate, grinding into a new position. The comfortable landscape of my affection for him was suddenly, irrevocably altered. It was no longer just friendship. It was something deeper, something more dangerous. It was love. The shutter in my mind clicked, capturing the image, burning it onto the sensitive material of my heart. And I knew, with a sinking feeling of utter certainty, that my life had just become infinitely more complicated. Of course, I said nothing. I buried it. I packed it down deep, into the basement of my consciousness, and locked the door. He was my friend, my best friend. He was straight. He was dating a woman named Sarah at the time, a perfectly nice person who he seemed genuinely happy with. Risking the easy, comfortable reality of our friendship for the impossible fantasy that had just bloomed in my chest would have been an act of self-sabotage. So I became a master architect of my own interior world, building walls and reinforcing doors to keep the feeling contained. Our friendship continued, deepened even. A year later, when my lease was up and his roommate moved out, he suggested I move in. It made sense. The rent was cheaper, the location was perfect. It was a purely logical decision. But for me, it felt like agreeing to live inside a temple dedicated to a god I was forbidden from worshiping. Every day was a practice in quiet reverence and careful self-control. I learned the rhythm of his life, the sound of his key in the lock, the way he left his coffee mug on the counter, the specific sigh he made when he was stressed. My love for him became a part of the apartment's atmosphere, as invisible and as essential as the air itself. It was a quiet, constant ache, a beautiful, secret pain that I learned to carry. It was, I thought, the price of his friendship, and I paid it willingly. The catalyst arrived on a rainy Thursday in March. Ben had been away for 2 weeks on a grueling work trip to Chicago, a high-stakes project launch that had him working 16-hour days. I had grown accustomed to the silence of the apartment, the undisturbed order of my own solitude. When I heard his key in the lock late that night, I felt a familiar jolt of warmth, the quiet satisfaction of a house returning to its proper state of being. But when he walked in, he looked like a ship that had been battered by a storm. He was pale, his shoulders slumped under the weight of his laptop bag. The usual bright energy that radiated from him was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out exhaustion that seemed to dim the very air around him. He dropped his bags by the door, the sound echoing in the stillness. "Hey," I said from the couch, pausing the movie I was watching. "Welcome back. How was it?" He just shook his head, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. He walked past the couch and into the kitchen, his movements slow, leaden. I heard him open the fridge, then close it. He came back into the living room and sank into the armchair opposite me, staring at the blank television screen. "It's over," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "With Sarah." I waited, letting the silence hold the space for him to continue. He didn't offer details, and I didn't ask. He just said it happened over the phone a few days ago, a conversation that had apparently been a long time coming, at least for her. He spoke about it with a strange detachment, as if recounting the plot of a book he'd read. But the story wasn't in the words he said, it was in the spaces between them. It was in the bleak emptiness of his eyes, the way his hands lay limp in his lap. It wasn't just the breakup. It was the brutal project, the exhaustion, the loneliness of a hotel room, all of it culminating in this quiet, devastating collapse. He was a fortress whose walls had finally been breached, and he didn't have the energy to even survey the damage. That night marked the beginning of the shift. He didn't want to go out. He canceled plans with other friends. He retreated from the world, his orbit shrinking until it encompassed only the quiet, predictable space of our apartment. And in that space, there was only me. I became his anchor in a sea of emotional turmoil. I didn't press him to talk. I just existed alongside him. I made sure there was food in the fridge. I put on movies he liked. I offered a quiet, constant presence, a silent promise that he wasn't alone. I was trying to be a good friend. I was trying to keep my own feelings locked away, to not let the hope that was beginning to flicker in that dark, forbidden basement of my heart see the light of day. I told myself his leaning on me was born of necessity, of proximity. It had nothing to do with me, not really. I was just there. But a part of me, a treacherous, hopeful part, began to wonder. He was running on empty, emotionally and physically. He started talking about how he couldn't sleep, how his mind would race the moment his head hit the pillow in his own quiet room. He complained that his bedroom felt too empty, the silence too loud. He was a man who thrived on connection, on energy, and he had been stripped of it all at once. His usual outlets, the gym, his large circle of friends, his relationship, were either inaccessible or felt like too much effort. So he began to gravitate towards the living room, towards the simple, passive comfort of sharing space. He was like a plant, starved of sunlight, turning instinctively towards the only available source of warmth. I just happened to be that source. And I was terrified that if I let myself feel the warmth of his attention, I would eventually get burned when he, inevitably, healed and turned back towards the sun. The ritual began subtly, almost by accident. It was a week or so after his return. We were on the couch, watching some mindless action movie, the kind that requires no emotional investment. It was late. I was aware of him beside me, a solid presence in my peripheral vision. I noticed his breathing began to deepen, to even out. Then, I felt a slight pressure against my arm. I glanced over. His head had slumped to the side, coming to rest gently on my shoulder. My entire body went rigid. Every nerve ending in my shoulder, my arm, my entire right side, fired at once. It was as if I'd been struck by a soft, warm bolt of lightning. I held my breath, afraid that the slightest movement would wake him, would shatter the fragile, impossible moment. He slept like that for nearly an hour. My arm went numb. My neck began to ache from the rigid posture I was holding. But I didn't move. I wouldn't have moved for anything. I sat there, in the flickering light of the movie, acutely aware of every tiny detail. The weight of his head, the soft texture of his t-shirt against my skin, the way a few strands of his hair tickled my neck. It was an exquisite torture. My carefully constructed walls were being tested, the locks on my basement door rattling. This was a new kind of proximity, a new level of intimacy that our friendship had never before approached. When the movie ended and the credits rolled, I finally, gently, shifted. He stirred, lifting his head with a soft, mumbled sound. "Sorry," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "Must have drifted off. Your shoulder is surprisingly comfortable." He gave a small, tired smile, and then stood up, stretched, and shuffled off to his room without another word. I remained on the couch for a long time after he left, my shoulder tingling, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was an accident, I told myself. He was exhausted. It meant nothing. It was a fluke, a one-time occurrence. But it wasn't. 2 nights later, it happened again. This time, it felt less accidental. We were watching another movie, and I could almost feel him fighting sleep, his head nodding, until finally, he let it fall, a soft, deliberate weight against my shoulder. He didn't apologize this time. It was the beginning of a pattern, a new, unspoken clause in the contract of our cohabitation. The living room couch became our space. After dinner, we would migrate there, put on a movie or a show, and at some point, he would fall asleep against me. It became our routine, our ritual. And with each repetition, my internal world was thrown into a greater state of turmoil. The progression was slow, a gradual erosion of boundaries. The shoulder became the standard. Then one night, he was particularly restless. He shifted, turning towards me, and ended up with his head in my lap, his body curled on the couch facing me. The first time it happened, I thought my heart would stop. It felt like a line had not just been crossed, but obliterated. To have him there, so close, so vulnerable, his face just inches from my hand which rested, frozen, on the cushion beside him. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my arm. I could see the faint flutter of his eyelids as he dreamed. It was too much. It was everything. I would sit there for hours, a statue carved from equal parts bliss and terror, cataloging the rise and fall of his chest, memorizing the shape of his eyelashes against his cheek. My love for him, so long kept in the abstract, was now a tangible, physical thing. It was the heavy warmth of his body, the scent of his skin. It was real, and it was resting in my lap, and I had no idea what to do with it. He would wake up in the middle of the night, disoriented, and murmur an apology before stumbling off to his own bed. But the apologies grew fainter, more perfunctory, until they stopped altogether. It was simply what we did now. It was our new normal. He started bringing his pillow and a blanket out to the living room, claiming he just slept better out here. "It's less quiet," he'd say. "The hum of the city, I don't know. It's better," but we both knew it wasn't the city. It was the proximity. He needed an anchor, and I was it. My mind raced, trying to interpret the data. Was this just a desperate need for comfort, for any warm body to cling to in the wake of his emotional shipwreck? Or was it something more? Was it possible that he was unconsciously seeking this comfort from me specifically? The ambiguity was killing me. It was a Schrodinger's cat of affection. As long as the box remained closed, as long as nothing was spoken, his actions could be both platonic and something more, existing in a quantum state of uncertainty. To ask, to speak, would be to open the box, to force a reality, and I was terrified of what I might find. A dead cat, a dead friendship. Then came the detail of the door. His bedroom door, which had always been firmly closed at night, a clear demarcation of his private space, started to be left ajar. Just a crack at first, a sliver of darkness. Then it was open a few inches, then a foot. It felt like an invitation, a test, a threshold I was being dared to cross. I would walk past it on my way to my own room, my heart pounding, my eyes drawn to that slice of his private world. I could see the corner of his bed, the pile of clothes on his chair. It was a silent gesture, but it screamed at me. What did it mean? Was he just careless, or was he, on some level, communicating a desire for me to close the distance? To come in? I never did. I couldn't. The risk was too great. I would stand in the hallway, a ghost in our shared home, before retreating to the safety of my own room, the door clicking shut behind me, a sound of finality, of cowardice. The night he asked the question, the atmosphere was different. The usual comforting quiet of our ritual felt charged, heavy with unspoken things. He wasn't asleep. I knew he wasn't. His breathing was too shallow, too conscious. His head was in my lap, as had become the norm, but he was tense. I could feel it in the subtle stiffness of his neck. He had been quiet all evening, responding to my questions in monosyllables. Something was on his mind. The movie we were supposedly watching played on, a meaningless stream of light and sound. I was focused entirely on him, on the taut energy radiating from him. His hand, which usually lay still, came up and rested on his stomach. His fingers began to trace idle patterns on the fabric of his own t-shirt. My eyes followed the movement. Then, his hand moved, very slowly, and his fingers began to trace the same patterns on the worn denim of my jeans, right beside his head. My breath hitched. It was the most deliberate, conscious touch he had ever initiated in all these weeks. It wasn't the incidental contact of sleep, it was an intentional act. The touch was feather-light, barely there, but it sent a shock wave through my system. My whole body was screaming. He continued the motion, his fingertips a whisper against the rough fabric, a stark contrast to the chaos erupting inside me. The silence stretched, pulled taut like a wire. I felt like I was at the top of a roller coaster, in that terrifying, weightless moment just before the plunge. "I trust you more than anyone," he said, his voice a low murmur, directed at my legs, at the ceiling, at anywhere but me. The words were so soft I almost thought I'd imagined them. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "I trust you too, Ben," I managed to say, my own voice sounding foreign and strained. There was a long pause. His fingers stilled on my leg. The weight of his head seemed to increase, pressing me deeper into the cushions. The air grew thick, heavy with the gravity of what was coming next. He took a slow breath, a sound that was both a sigh and a preparation. Then, without looking up, his gaze still fixed on some indeterminate point in the middle distance, he asked, "Do you feel the same?" It wasn't a question. It was a plea. It was a key, being offered to a door I had kept locked for 4 years. He wasn't asking if I trusted him. That had already been established. He was asking something else entirely. He was asking if I felt the same current running between us, the same strange, terrifying, wonderful thing that had taken over our quiet apartment. He was asking if I was as lost and as found in this space between friendship and whatever this was, as he was. My heart, which had been hammering, suddenly went still. The roller coaster was tipping over the edge, and he wasn't even looking at me. He was too afraid. He was leaving it all to me. To answer, to not answer. To pretend I didn't understand the real question. But I did. Oh, I did. I understood it perfectly. I didn't answer with words. The moment was too fragile for something as clumsy as language. I looked down at him, at the top of his head, the familiar whirl of his dark hair. My hand, which had been frozen on the couch beside him, lifted. It was the slowest, most deliberate movement of my life. It felt like it was moving through water, pushing against the immense pressure of 4 years of restraint. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, my fingers hovering in the air just above his hair, the space between us crackling with electricity. This was it. This was the opening of the box. This was the choice. I could retreat, pretend I misunderstood, and our friendship might survive, bruised but intact. Or I could answer his real question, and nothing would ever be the same. I thought of the lonely, quiet ache I had carried for so long. I thought of the 67 nights of this beautiful, agonizing ritual, and I realized I was done being the quiet observer. I wanted to be in the frame. I wanted to be part of the picture. My hand came down, gently, and my fingers threaded into his hair. It was softer than I had imagined. He inhaled sharply, a tiny, involuntary gasp. It was the only sign he gave, but it was enough. It was a confirmation. He didn't pull away. He didn't move at all. In fact, if it were possible, he seemed to lean into my touch, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift of weight. I kept my hand there, a silent answer to his unspoken plea. Yes, yes, I feel it too. The tension that had been holding his body rigid seemed to dissolve, melting away under my touch. He let out a long, slow breath, a sound of surrender, of relief. We stayed like that for a long time. The only sound, the meaningless dialogue from the television and the frantic, synchronized beating of our two hearts. The silence was no longer heavy or anxious. It was full. It was a silence of mutual understanding, of a threshold finally, irrevocably crossed together. The end of the night came without ceremony. He eventually shifted, pulling away from my lap not with the disoriented haste of previous nights, but with a slow, deliberate grace. He stood up and stretched, and for the first time, he looked directly at me. His eyes, which had been so empty and lost for weeks, were clear. They were filled with a terrifying mix of vulnerability and something else, something I dared not name, but recognized instantly. Hope. "I'm going to bed," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Okay," I replied, my own voice barely a whisper. He hesitated for a moment, standing in the space between the couch and the hallway. He looked at me, then at his own bedroom door, which was, as usual, standing wide open. He seemed to be having an internal debate. Then he turned and walked, not to his own room, but to mine. He stopped at my doorway and looked back at me. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. It was another question, the next in a series that had begun with his hand on my leg. I understood this one too. I stood up from the couch, my legs unsteady, and walked towards him, towards my own open door, where he was waiting. The crossing was complete. We had moved from the ambiguous territory of the living room into the undeniable intimacy of a bedroom. The air was thick with unspoken confessions and the terrifying, thrilling promise of what came next. He was already in my bed when I came out of the bathroom, lying on his side, facing the door, the covers pulled up to his chest. He watched me as I moved around the room, turning off the lamp, plunging us into the soft darkness that was lit only by the pale glow of streetlights filtering through the blinds. I slid into bed beside him, the mattress dipping with my weight. The space between us felt enormous, a vast, uncharted territory. For all the physical closeness we had shared on the couch, this felt different. This was intentional. There was no pretext of sleep, no shield of exhaustion. This was just two people, awake and aware, in a bed together. The silence was deafening. "Alex," he whispered into the dark, his voice tentative. "Yeah," I whispered back, my heart pounding. He rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling. I'm really scared." The confession hung in the air, simple and devastatingly honest. "Me too," I admitted. He turned his head on the pillow to look at me. I could just make out the shape of his face in the dim light. "What is this?" he asked, his voice full of genuine confusion. "What are we doing?" "I don't know," I said, and it was the truest thing I had ever said. I just know I didn't want you to go to your own room tonight." He was quiet for a moment, processing that. Then he rolled onto his side again, closing some of the distance between us. He was so close I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Would it be okay," he began, his voice barely audible, "if I—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. But I knew the question. It was the final question of the night. "Yes," I breathed out, the word a puff of air in the cold room. "Yes, Ben. It would be okay." He moved closer, his hand coming up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. The touch was gentle, questioning. I leaned into it, closing my eyes, giving him the answer he was looking for. And then his lips met mine. It was not a kiss of passion or of pent-up desire. It was a kiss of discovery. It was tentative, soft, and breathtakingly tender. It was a question and an answer, a confession and an absolution, all at once. It tasted of mint tea and fear and a profound, bone-deep relief. It was the sound of a lock, rusted shut for 4 years, finally, gently, clicking open. In the quiet of my room, in the anonymous dark, something new was being created, an image slowly developing in the chemical bath of our shared vulnerability. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of what it would become. The morning after felt like waking up in a foreign country. The light filtering through the blinds was the same. The sounds from the street outside were the same, but the geography of my life had been fundamentally redrawn. I woke up first. Ben was still asleep, his back to me, his body curled into a comma. A sliver of sunlight cut across the pillow, illuminating the fine hairs on the back of his neck. My first instinct was a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. It was a warm, liquid feeling that spread through my chest. He was here. This was real. But then, a colder, sharper feeling followed immediately in its wake: fear. The stark reality of the morning had arrived. Last night had been a dreamlike sequence of whispers and shadows, a world unto itself. Today was the real world, a world of consequences and questions without easy answers. I lay there for a long time, not moving, just watching him sleep. I was cataloging the moment, trying to commit every detail to memory, as if I knew it was fleeting. The pattern of his breathing, the way the blanket was tangled around his legs, the peaceful, unguarded expression on his sleeping face. It was a perfect, fragile image, and a part of me wanted to stay in it forever. But the sun kept rising, the city kept waking up, and the inevitable moment of reckoning was approaching. What would he be like when he woke up? Would the tenderness of last night survive the harsh light of day? Or would it evaporate like a dream, leaving behind an awkward, friendship-destroying residue? When he finally stirred, it was with a groan. He stretched, his arm bumping against me, and for a moment, he went still. I could feel the exact second that memory flooded back into him. The instant his body tensed with the realization of where he was and who he was with. He didn't turn to face me. He just lay there, perfectly still, his back a rigid wall between us. The comfortable silence of the night before was gone, replaced by a thick, suffocating awkwardness. "I have an early meeting," he said, his voice rough with sleep and something else I couldn't identify. He swung his legs out of bed, still not looking at me, and stood up. He grabbed his clothes from the floor and started pulling them on with a jerky, hurried efficiency. "Ben," I started, sitting up. "I gotta run." He cut me off, his back still to me as he pulled on his shoes. "I'm late." He wasn't late. It was 7 in the morning, but I didn't call him on it. I just watched as he practically fled the room, grabbing his keys and laptop bag from the living room on his way out. The front door clicked shut behind him, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent apartment. And then I was alone. The space he had occupied in my bed was still warm. The indentation of his head was still on the pillow. But he was gone. And the beautiful, hopeful thing that had bloomed in the darkness of the previous night had been thrown into the harsh, unforgiving light of day, and it was already starting to wilt. The next 3 days were among the longest of my life. The apartment, which had become a sanctuary, a shared nest of quiet intimacy, transformed into a cold, empty space full of ghosts. Ben was avoiding me. He came home late, long after I had retreated to my room, and he left before I was awake. We communicated through brief, sterile text messages about bills or groceries. The living room couch sat empty, a monument to what we had lost. His bedroom door, which had been a symbol of invitation, was now perpetually, defiantly closed. The silence was no longer a comfortable, shared language. It was a weapon, a wall he had erected between us, and I was on the wrong side of it. My mind became a torture chamber of self-recrimination. I replayed every moment of that night, every touch, every word, searching for where I had gone wrong. Had I misread everything? Had he been so lost in his own grief and loneliness that he had reached for comfort in a way he now profoundly regretted? Was he disgusted with himself? Was he disgusted with me? The thought was a physical pain, a sharp, twisting knife in my gut. I had been so careful for so long, and in one night of weakness, one night of allowing myself to hope, I had destroyed the most important relationship in my life. The quiet, constant ache of my unrequited love was nothing compared to this. This was the acute, searing pain of loss, of having something incredible in my grasp for a fleeting moment only to have it turn to ash in my hands. I felt like a fool, a naive, hopeful idiot who had mistaken a cry for help for a declaration of love. By the 4th day, I couldn't take it anymore. The not knowing was worse than any possible truth. I needed to hear it from him. Even if it was the worst-case scenario, I needed to open the box and look at the dead cat, so I could at least begin the process of grieving. I sent him a simple text. "We need to talk." I'll be home all night, he didn't reply, but I knew he'd seen it. I spent the afternoon pacing the apartment, my anxiety a coiled snake in my stomach. I cleaned things that were already clean. I rearranged books. I did anything to keep my hands and mind occupied. He came home around 8. I heard his key in the lock, and my heart leaped into my throat. He walked in and stood in the entryway, not taking off his coat, his laptop bag still slung over his shoulder. He looked exhausted, older than he had just a few days ago. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Hey," he said, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Hey," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. I was standing by the kitchen counter, using it as an anchor. Can we talk for a minute?" He sighed, a long, weary sound, and finally looked at me. His eyes were full of a miserable cocktail of guilt and confusion. I'm so sorry." "Sorry for what exactly?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Sorry for kissing me? Or sorry for acting like I don't exist for the past 3 days?" He flinched. He dropped his bag to the floor and ran a hand over his face. "Both," he mumbled. "Everything. I messed everything up. I shouldn't have. That night was a mistake." The word mistake landed like a punch. I felt the air leave my lungs. So that was it. The cat was dead. I had my answer. A bitter, angry part of me wanted to lash out, to yell at him for his carelessness, for playing with feelings he clearly didn't understand. But when I looked at him, standing there looking so utterly lost and broken, the anger dissipated, replaced by a profound, aching sadness. Was it a mistake? I asked, my voice quiet now. Or was it just scary? That question seemed to break through his defenses. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a raw, desperate vulnerability. "I don't know," he whispered, and his voice cracked. "I don't know what it was. I don't feel that way. About guys. I'm not. I don't know what I am." He gestured vaguely between us, a look of sheer panic on his face. "But when I was with you on the couch, it was the only time in months I felt safe. It was the only time my head stopped screaming at me. And it started to feel like more than that. It felt good. Too good. And that night, when you touched my hair, it was like something inside me just snapped. I wanted to be closer to you. And when we kissed," he shook his head, unable to continue. "What about when we kissed, Ben?" I pushed gently. He finally met my gaze, and his eyes were swimming with unshed tears. "It felt right," he confessed, the words barely audible. "That's what's scaring me. It felt more right than anything has in a very long time." And I woke up the next morning and I freaked out. I don't know what this means about me, about us. I just know that our friendship is the most important thing in my life, and I felt like I had just taken a grenade to it. So I ran. It was cowardly and it was stupid, and I'm so sorry I hurt you. His confession, his fear, his confusion. It was all there, laid bare between us in the sterile light of the hallway. The anger and hurt inside me began to recede, replaced by a wave of empathy. He wasn't rejecting me. He was terrified of himself. He was a man whose entire map of the world had been set on fire, and he had no idea how to navigate the charred landscape that was left. He hadn't run from me. He had run from the terrifying, beautiful truth that our kiss had revealed. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I had to be what I had always been for him. The anchor. The quiet, steady presence in his storm. I closed the distance between us, moving from the kitchen to the hallway where he stood frozen. I gently took his hand. His skin was cold. He looked down at our joined hands, then back up at my face, his expression uncertain. "You didn't ruin anything," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You're confused and you're scared. That's okay. We can be confused and scared together." I took a deep breath, preparing to finally unlock the door to my own secret garden and let him see it all. "Ben, I've been in love with you for 4 years. What happened the other night wasn't a mistake for me. It was everything. But I never, ever would have risked our friendship if I didn't think. If I didn't feel that you were feeling something too." His eyes widened as he processed my words. "For years. The weight of that time, of my silence, settled between us." He squeezed my hand, a silent acknowledgement. "For years," he breathed. "And you never said anything?" "I was scared too," I admitted. "I was terrified of losing you." "You're not going to lose me." he said, his voice thick with emotion. I need time, Alex. I need to figure out what my own head is doing. I know, I said. Take all the time you need. Just, please don't shut me out again. Whatever this is, we can figure it out. But we have to do it together. No more running. He nodded, a single, decisive movement. A tear he'd been holding back finally escaped and traced a path down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. Okay, he whispered. Together, the conversation that followed lasted for hours. We moved to the couch, that same couch, but this time we sat at opposite ends, facing each other. There was no physical contact, just a raw, terrifying, and ultimately cleansing honesty. He talked about the pressure he'd always felt to be a certain kind of man, the life he thought he was supposed to want. He talked about his relationship with Sarah, about how it had felt comfortable but had lacked a deeper connection he couldn't articulate. He talked about the profound loneliness that had been hounding him for years, a loneliness that all his friends and his busy social life couldn't seem to touch. And he talked about us, about our friendship, how it had always been the one place he felt he could be completely himself, without performance or pretense. I listened, and then I talked. I told him about the day in the park, about the years of carefully managing my feelings. I told him what it had been like for me, these past few months, having him so close but so far away. I explained that I never expected anything from him, that his friendship was always more than enough. I laid all my cards on the table, holding nothing back. It was the scariest thing I had ever done. By the time we finished, the sky outside was beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn. We were both emotionally exhausted, but for the first time in days, the air in the apartment felt clean. The heavy, suffocating weight had lifted. There were no easy answers, no neat labels for what we were now. But the silence between us was no longer an absence. It was a space to breathe, to think, to heal. A space we could build something new in, together. The days that followed our talk were quiet and tentative, like the first shoots of green after a long, hard winter. The dynamic between us had shifted again, but this time, it was built on a foundation of honesty, not ambiguity. There was an awkwardness, yes, but it was a healing kind of awkwardness, the kind that comes from navigating a new and delicate landscape. We were learning a new language together, one that didn't rely on unspoken rituals or fearful assumptions. We talked more. Real conversations, not just about the surface-level details of our days, but about what was going on inside our heads. He started seeing a therapist, something he admitted he should have done years ago. He was trying to untangle the knots in his own mind, to understand this unexpected turn in the path of his life. We didn't touch much at first. The couch ritual did not resume. We were consciously creating space, allowing the charged intimacy of the past to dissipate so we could rebuild something more intentional in its place. But the distance wasn't cold. It was respectful. We would eat dinner together, watch movies on opposite ends of the couch, and when we said goodnight, there was a new kind of look that passed between us, one of shared understanding, of patience. His bedroom door remained closed, but it no longer felt like a barrier. It felt like a boundary he was learning to define for himself, and I respected it. I was giving him the time he had asked for, and in doing so, I was showing him that my feelings for him weren't conditional on his ability to reciprocate them immediately. I loved him, the person, not the idea of a relationship, and I would be his friend first, always. About 2 weeks later, I was working late in my darkroom, a small, converted closet off the main hallway. The red safe light cast an eerie glow on the trays of chemicals, the scent of fixer sharp in the air. I was focused on a print, watching an image of a winter landscape slowly emerge on the paper, when I heard a soft knock on the door. Alex. Ben's voice came from the other side. It's safe to come in, I said. The print is already fixed. The door opened, and he slipped inside, closing it behind him. The tiny space was suddenly crowded. He stood beside me, his shoulder brushing against mine, and looked down at the print floating in the wash tray. It's beautiful, he said, his voice hushed in the quiet, sacred space of the darkroom. Thanks, I said. We stood in silence for a minute, the only sound the gentle lapping of water in the tray. Can I ask you something? He said, his voice still quiet. Of course, he turned to face me. In the dim, red light, I couldn't read his expression clearly, but I could feel the shift in his energy. That night, he began, when you said you had. For 4 years. Were you happy? Just being my friend. The question caught me off guard. I thought about it for a moment, about the long, lonely nights and the carefully concealed ache. It was complicated, I answered honestly. I was happy to have you in my life, in any capacity. You were, and are, my best friend. That was always real. But it was also painful sometimes. Loving someone in secret is a lonely business. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. I think, he said, his voice hesitant. I think I'm starting to understand that. He reached out, not for my hand, but for the sleeve of my shirt, his fingers gently pinching the fabric. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and a lot of talking, and I think I've spent my whole life being lonely next to people. With Sarah, with my other friends. I was always performing a little bit, being the person I thought I was supposed to be. The only place I never felt lonely was with you. He looked up then, and even in the strange red light, I could see the clarity in his eyes. The confusion was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty. I don't have all the answers, he said. I don't know what to call this, and maybe we don't need to. But I know I don't want to be lonely anymore. And I know I want to be with you. Not just on the couch. Not just as friends. I want this. He let go of my sleeve and took my hand, his fingers lacing with mine. His touch was no longer hesitant or accidental. It was a choice. A profound sense of peace washed over me, a quiet, steady tide. It wasn't the explosive joy I might have once fantasized about. It was something better. It was calmer, deeper. It was the feeling of coming home. Me too, I said, my voice thick. I want this too, he smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes, the first one I had seen in months. So, he said, a hint of his old playfulness returning. Does this mean I can start falling asleep on you again? My neck has been killing me. I laughed, a real laugh that felt like it came from the depths of my soul. Yeah, I said, squeezing his hand. I think that can be arranged. The new normal we built was quiet and unassuming, constructed not of grand gestures, but of small, intentional acts of love. The couch ritual returned, but it was different. Now, when he laid his head in my lap, it was a conscious act of affection, and I would run my fingers through his hair without hesitation, without fear. His bedroom door started to open again, and soon, it was simply an accepted fact that we would end each night in the same bed. There was no single moment of decision. It just became our natural state of being. Waking up next to him was no longer a source of anxiety, but the calmest, most peaceful part of my day. We learned the rhythms of each other's sleep, the language of touch in the dark. We created a life in the small, domestic spaces of our apartment. We made coffee together in the mornings, navigating the small kitchen in a comfortable, synchronized dance. We grocery shopped together, we did laundry, we built a life in the mundane. And in that beautiful, honest quiet, we began to heal. He was healing from years of a loneliness he hadn't known how to name, and I was healing from years of a love I hadn't known how to share. The secret garden I had tended for so long in solitude was no longer a secret. The gate was open, and he was there with me, not as a guest, but as the other gardener, helping me tend the soil, helping new things grow. We found that the safest rooms are not the ones with the strongest locks, but the ones with doors that you can walk through together, knowing you will be welcomed on the other side. We had crossed the threshold, and we had found our home, and it was more beautiful than anything I had ever dared to capture on film.